This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode I chat with the world's best writers about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Today I am talking to Eric LaRocca, whose collection, This Skin Was Once Mine and Other Disturbances, was recently announced as the winner of the Short Story Collection of the Year in the This Is Horror Awards. Now, Eric has a brand new book out, We Are Always Tender With Our Dead, which is the first in his brand new Burnt Sparrow trilogy. And while that forms the bulk of today's conversation, we do talk about a vast array of other topics, including some of Eric's writing influences, repeated choruses in fiction, and the thriving environment for horror fiction and short stories right now. So, a lot to look forward to, but before we jump into things, a quick advert break.
It was as if the video had unzipped my skin, slunk inside my tapered flesh, and become one with me.
From the creator of This Is Horror comes a new nightmare for the digital age, The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. After a teacher receives a weirdly arousing video, his life descends into paranoia and obsession. More videos follow, each containing information no stranger could possibly know. But who's sending them, and what do they want? The answers may destroy everything and everyone he loves. The Girl in the Video is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. Available now in paperback, ebook, and audio. From the host of This Is Horror Podcast comes a dark thriller of obsession, paranoia, and voyeurism. After relocating to a small coastal town, Brian discovers a hole that gazes into his neighbor's bedroom. Every night she dances and he peeps. Same song, same time, same wild and mesmerizing dance. But soon Brian suspects he's not the only one watching, and she's not the only one being watched. Their watching is The Wicker Man meets Body Double with a splash of Suspiria. Their Watching by Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella is available from thisishorror.co.uk, Amazon, and wherever good books are sold.
Okay, with that said, here it is. It is Eric LaRocca on This Is Horror. Eric, welcome back to This Is Horror.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here and to chat with you. I feel like we always have a really good conversation whenever we get together.
Oh yeah, I mean, I always love chatting with you. I always like reading your challenging and thought-provoking stories. And I mean, speaking of which, very recently you won the short story collection for This Skin Was Once Mine and Other Disturbances. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. I was very honored and very surprised that I won, considering the amazing talent in that category. It was really such an honor to win that award. So I cannot thank you enough and the voters, the people who voted. Like that means a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a richly deserved award for yourself. And I think actually, you speak about the competition. I think maybe last year was the most stacked short story collection year that we have had in a long time. I don't know if it's been that good, all the time that I've been running This Is Horror for over a decade now. So I wonder if we're in a kind of short story golden age right now.
I hope so. I mean, I love short stories, and I've always felt more comfortable in like the shorter form, like the novella format, but especially short stories. That's really where I like began my writing journey. So for me, like short fiction is just like my home, and I love reading short fiction. I especially love like the work of Mariana Enriquez, who was one of the nominees from that category. I love like Kelly Link. I think she writes really fascinating short fiction. Paul Tremblay also writes like really amazing short fiction, and Laird Barron, John Langan. I mean, the list goes on and on. I really feel like we're like what you said, like we really are in like a renaissance of short horror fiction where it's like really sophisticated and really elevated, even though like I kind of don't like using that word elevated with horror just because it just implies like things that I just don't love. But yeah, I feel like horror is just in a general sense, not maybe not even just short fiction, but horror fiction on the whole is really in a tremendous place right now, where it's so rich and so it's just thriving. I mean, there's so many authors writing compelling, interesting stories and novels, and novellas. Like, it's just incredible.
Yeah, and you speak about how, you love writing short stories, and, that's kind of how you got your start. I mean, certainly Things Have Gotten Worse is a shorter book and is more in that category. But then if we fast forward to today, and one of the things that we're here to talk about is the Burnt Sparrow trilogy, and We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. So what has it been like to shift from predominantly short story writing to then writing a trilogy? And was this always conceived as a trilogy, or did it initially start as a standalone and then you realize actually there's another two books in this?
Yeah, I mean, when I first set out to write what became this trilogy, I was kind of like, in the early on planning stages, I was looking at what I was outlining and how I wanted to convey the story, how I wanted to like accentuate certain character arcs. And the more I looked at the design of the narrative, like what I wanted to tell, the story I wanted to tell, I realized that it wasn't going to be like a slim volume, like, a slim novel, like what I've kind of been known for. Like you mentioned, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, of course. That viral hit novella is like 120 pages, but even my other novels that I've released since then, like Everything the Darkness Eats and At Dark I Become Loathsome, both of those are very short novels. And a lot of people have told me that they read them in like one sitting, just the way they read my novellas and short fiction collections. So approaching this piece of what became Burnt Sparrow, the Burnt Sparrow trilogy, I kind of realized like, oh, this story is so grand and so colossal in scope. Like, I really can't tell it in like 200, 300 pages. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh, it really is giving like Michael McDowell Blackwater vibes. Just for those of the listeners who maybe aren't familiar with Michael McDowell's Blackwater, it's this like epic. Just it was released as like installments in the 1980s when it was originally published, but it's this epic saga of a family in the South, and very ornately written, beautifully written, um, but also like very disturbing elements from that novel, from that like series of books is just so grotesque. Um, and I thought, when I approached Titan with the formal proposal of what was Burnt Sparrow, uh, we kind of went back and forth, and we decided, okay, we're going to release this as three separate books, as like a trilogy, because the way it was kind of structured, it kind of leaned into that narrative format of like, here's part 1, here's part 2, here's part 3. So I kind of, in a way, like wanted to kind of mimic Michael McDowell's release pattern with how he released Blackwater back in the 80s. He released the first book and then the second, but they released them, from what I understand from the research I've done on the publication history of those books, they released them pretty quickly, one after the other. And with the way publishing is now, the landscape is just different. The market is just a little bit more saturated, I think, than it was back in like the 1980s. Although maybe not entirely, because the 1980s were, a huge boom for horror, and probably one of the best decades of the genre. And I feel like we're in, like, the 2020s are like the new 1980s in a lot of ways. Like, I feel like we're in that just amazing golden age of horror fiction. But regardless, we decided to release the books, once every year, every September, as kind of like an autumnal treat. And it's kind of like, the more I thought about it, I would have loved to release the books as just one like sort of omnibus edition with like everything included in it. And, you get the story, you get like 800 or 900 pages of the story that I've written. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I really do want this to kind of be like a slow IV drip. Like, I want this to be like something that you savor, because like the writing, at least from my standpoint, like what I hope it is, the writing I hope is very like Baroque and very lush and very decadent. So it's not something that you like can just binge all at once. I feel like a book like this, or books like these, I feel like they're better off to be savored like delicately over the course of maybe 2 or 3 years. So that's kind of like the genesis for the series. But to answer your question about how it's been shifting from short fiction to the longer fiction material, it has been a bit of a challenge, only just because I feel like my brain is programmed to think in that shorter fiction format, and to think like, how can I tell this story as quickly and as effectively as possible in like as few amount of words as I possibly can. Because editors obviously don't love it when you go over word counts in like anthologies, or even like fiction collections. They don't want it to be like this sprawling like epic collection. So it has been difficult to kind of rewire my brain and approach things a little bit more, I don't want to say like intricately or like conceptually, because I feel like my work has been intricate in like short fiction, and has once I graduated to the longer fiction, I feel like it has maybe gotten even maybe more intricate. But I think a way that I've kind of satisfied my yearning for short fiction is to kind of nest other little stories inside the narrative of the overarching plot. And I've kind of done this by threading different stories that like characters will tell one another in, especially at Dark I Become Loathsome. That was one where I like threaded other, like I kind of layered other stories into the narrative. And then of course, We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. There's like the story that Rupert's mother tells him over the tape recorder. There's the story that Rupert tells, well, I don't want to spoil it too much, but there's the story at the end that is kind of woven into the fabric of the narrative. So that's kind of my way of like getting what I really want, which is I really do love writing short fiction more than anything. And I feel like short fiction is just the ultimate kind of form of horror fiction, because it's very difficult to sustained dread and terror for like 400 or 500 pages. You know, I at least for me, like, it's difficult for me to like capture a reader and make them really frightened or unnerved for a long period of time. I think the kind of immersive qualities of short fiction and novellas, I feel like it really lends itself really well to horror, especially. Um, so that being said, I'm obviously a very big supporter of short fiction, short horror fiction.
And presumably because you're embarking on these more epic stories, you're not having a way to also write short fiction. So, I mean, for the
Mhm.
last few years, you've, released back to back remarkable short story collections, but I'm assuming that the short story collection mode is going to go on hiatus for the time being.
Yeah, unfortunately, all of my like planned releases into like 2028, they're all novels. And I love writing novels. Like, I really do love writing novels, and I love being able to nest shorter stories, like shorter works, into the larger narrative. But uh, that being said, like, there's just not a huge market for short fiction, and there's just not a lot of like public appetite for that, which is really a shame, because I feel like short fiction is a great gateway for a lot of readers to kind of introduce themselves to certain authors, get a taste for what an author is like, serving, what kind of author an author is, basically. And it's a much bigger commitment to like sit down and read like a 300, 400 page novel, as opposed to, a short fiction collection that's maybe 200 pages, but each story is perhaps 10 or 15 pages. I think it speaks to our modern way of life, where everything is just so fast paced and everything is just like go go go. It doesn't make sense to me how shorter fiction isn't like a necessity, and like a publishing sort of, there's like that need for it in publishing doesn't really exist the way I would think it might.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like about 5 or so years ago, there was a little bit of an upshoot or an experiment with Kindle singles where you'd have
Mhm.
these short stories released as standalones. And, as you're saying, particularly with things being fast paced, with kind of on demand video streaming services being more popular than ever, you would think, why wouldn't you want a bite-sized story? Why wouldn't people be kind of lining up to get a little taste? But it's actually not happening at the moment. And like you
Yeah, and
say,
I really thought it was going to for a while. Like, I felt like there were so many novellas, especially in horror, being released that were like so provocative and so daring, and I don't know, it didn't really translate. The big publishers still really only want novels.
there was an app a few years ago. I'm blanking on the name, but I know that people like Max Booth and Paul Tremblay had stories on it, and it was I don't even know if you know what app I'm referring to, but you could kind of subscribe, and it was almost like a Netflix of short stories. It unfortunately went under, but I could imagine that if it were to take off, this would be the way to do it, to have this app service where you search for, your different writers, and then you probably pay, a set fee, much like Netflix or Amazon, to get that per month. But it's obviously difficult to set up because you've got to get enough writers on board. You've got to get, from a commercial point of view, you need to get high profile authors on board too. And, you know, that's the way that you're potentially going to attract people. But yeah, I'll have to look up what this app was because it was so good, but and it paid right as well. You know, it was a well-paying market, but
It wasn't because there were like these Amazon shorts that they did, and like they did that. I think this year they did a couple like Amazon exclusive short stories, and like Grady Hendrix was one of them. Joe Hill was one of them. I think like Paul Tremblay has been one of the selected authors in the past. Um, but I don't know. Maybe is that what you're referring to, or maybe it's something
so
else?
it wasn't that. Like, I'm familiar with the Amazon shorts that you're talking about because this wasn't Amazon. This was a smaller company that did this, but yeah, they are doing the Amazon shorts, but we're only getting like what 5 to 8 a year. My appetite is for for more of them,
I
but
know. I know.
I guess rather than fantasy booking a service that doesn't exist yet, let's go back to your books and your stories, which most certainly do exist. And I mean, you were talking about how you've almost satisfied this need for writing short stories by putting stories within the longer story. And, you know, that certainly came across. It reminded me at times of something a little bit like Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk or the Canterbury Tales. And of
Yeah.
course, you had what's almost became a trademark in your stories. You had elements of epistolary storytelling
Yes.
as well. So I think you kind of satisfied that need for readers as well, and it almost added to the unnerving nature and how unsettling it was because you didn't know where are you going to go next or what fucked up little story or kind of this I was going to say interlude, but that almost suggests that it's separate. You know, it was within, it all made sense. But yeah, just anticipating where things were going to go. Um, you know, speaking of Chuck Palahniuk, he blurbed Wretch recently. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, that seems so apropos because I've always thought that there's kind of a kinship between what you're doing and what Chuck is doing. And perhaps it has never been so apparent than with the first of the Burnt Sparrow books, because, I mean, this I think is your most taboo of all your books. You went to places that we're just not meant to go. You know, society tells us you can't talk about these things. You certainly can't write about them. And you know that there's a story about, let's say, the brothers. Let's leave it
Yeah.
at that. And
Yeah.
actually what you were doing there was a big parallel between the, I think, two books back now from Chuck, Not Forever But For Now. And I
Yes.
remember with Not Forever But For Now, he said, you know, Chuck said he took us right up to the moment and implied what was going to happen. Well,
Mhm.
you took us right up to the moment and then explicitly laid out absolutely everything that did happen.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I am a huge Chuck Palahniuk fan. I mean, he is like one of my favorite authors of all time. Him, Clive Barker, and Dennis Cooper are like the holy trinity for me for like transgressive fiction. So when he blurbed Wretch, which is coming out next year in March, it was like I had been. I feel like I had spent my whole writing journey like trying to get his attention, and like now that it finally happened, it was just so gratifying and so fulfilling. Um, but I respect his work so much, so deeply, and um, he seems like such a lovely, wonderful person, and just so genuine and very like giving, very helpful, very generous when it comes to helping out like newer, younger writers. Um, so I like love Chuck with like my whole being. But that said, like I was thinking a lot about his work in particular while writing this book, especially the sequence that you're referring to, because you know so many of his books are really focusing on like the taboo and the emotional weight of these transgressions and how they affect characters and how they shape identity. And I really wanted this book to kind of explore those things as well. So I thought a lot about Chuck while writing this book. I thought a lot about Dennis Cooper, of course. I thought a lot about Poppy Z. Bright, or Billy Martin, as he's known now. I am such a student of transgressive fiction, and it's my true love, and I feel really honored to be able to contribute anything to this subgenre. I think it's not for everybody. I definitely acknowledge that. It's certainly not for everybody. It's not for those who maybe are a little bit squeamish, or those who are just not looking to be really challenged by their fiction. And but for those who that it's for, it really is for them. And I feel like it's such a difficult process to find the people that the book is for. It's almost like dating. You have to kind of weed through so many different variables and possibilities before you find like the right one, like the one that's meant to read this book, that one that like actually cares about what you're trying to say and like the story you're trying to tell. So I don't know, it's difficult. It's not easy to write this sort of material and then have people have opinions about it, and kind of like critique it and grade it with like this weird morality checklist. But in a way, those reviewers and those critics and readers, like they do actually help the book find the right people, which is really special, I think, in a lot of ways. And I know Chuck, I feel like his books kind of push the same buttons that mine do. And I feel like his reviews are pretty similar to the reviews that I get. So I feel like there is like a kinship there. I feel like there is like a level of, I see like a lot of my fiction. I feel like it's talking to his fiction in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I think that's really rewarding for me as an author, just because I've spent like so much of my life reading his books and worshiping him.
Yeah, I definitely think they're in conversation. And like I say, you're providing an answer to what would Not Forever But For Now look like if
Mhm.
it was explicit rather than implicit, and
Yeah.
if it was a much shorter form story, because this is a story within a story. I mean, it does form part of the wider story, but this is a sequence. And yeah, you so expertly as well. There were times where you covered the events of an entire year in a few sentences, and it's like, wow, this is how you do it.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think that's just like me tapping into like my short fiction brain, where it's like you have to be kind of like you have to be very selective about what you write and how you convey certain things. And for that sequence in particular, I knew I wanted it to like hit certain beats at certain moments. and have a certain kind of pacing. So I think that sequence was especially like rooted in my love of just writing fucked up short fiction.
And I have to say as well, I mean, I've noticed it in your fiction before, but never has it been so apparent. You know, this almost repeated chorus, repeated phrases and words. Like, obviously, it's called We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. The word tender and the concept of tending for or being tender is all within this novel. And
Mhm.
like that is, again, that is something that Chuck does a lot. He's got these repeated choruses and these phrases. But I guess as well, the more fiction of yours that I read, the more I get to appreciate how this is fits into the bigger picture of your canon, because you were repeating vile, you were repeating wretch, and that there's something satisfying as a fan of your work to just see, your other novels being in conversation with one another, and you exploring these concepts again and again in a very satisfying way that then adds to the overall enjoyment. Although some people might think is the word enjoyment, the overall satisfaction and the artistry of the piece.
Thank you. That means a lot. I mean, I think some people find the repetition like they're not as appreciative as you are with the repetition, but that's their problem. I love any sort of moment I can like be referential to something else, and especially like referential to my own work, but I'm also like referencing like a lot of work that I really appreciate from like just horror in the past, like Clive Barker, Philip Ridley, who I just am obsessed with his work. He's a very well-known like British playwright and filmmaker and author. I love his work. I love Sarah Kane, who's was a playwright back in like the 90s. So like I love referencing material that I'm obsessed with regardless, but I do love like calling out other words and phrases that are like in my other books as kind of like a reprise of like a kind of like a chorus, like what you said, like it's just repeating the same sort of idea, sort of those notions. um i i I think I mean, I keep doing it, so obviously I'm a fan of it. But I try to do it sparingly so that it doesn't like aggravate too much those who like maybe aren't as big a fan of it as I am. But I think I mean, we start out in this industry, this like insane industry that we're all in, the publishing industry or like the arts in general. We start out as being a fan. We start out as being like an admirer of the work that exists already. So we start out admiring work by like Stephen King and Clive Barker and Robert R. McCammon and Michael McDowell. We admire these people and we want to create and sculpt and tell our own stories in our own ways. And I think there's no bigger honor that I can think of than to like reference something else, something that someone else has written in your own work, or reference your own work in your work. I know Richard Lehman did that quite a bit. He was like a splatterpunk author from like the 1980s and 1990s, and I love his fiction a lot. And that's also why I dedicate a lot of my books to authors who have like influenced me or have shown me like a lot of kindness ever since I kind of came into the industry. So for this book in particular, I dedicated it to Brian Evanson, who is probably one of the sweetest, the gentlest guys you could ever come across. And he's also like one of the most skilled and talented writers of weird, uncanny, unnerving fiction. But he's shown me like so much kindness ever since I first met him a few years ago, and I really wanted to like repay him in a way for that generosity, that kind of beautiful kindness that he showed me. And I hope he accepts the kindness the way I intend it to be accepted. Um, but yeah, I've done that with a few books now. Like At Dark I Become Loathsome was dedicated to Daniel Kraus. The Skin Was Once Mine and Other Disturbances was dedicated to Paul. So it's definitely like a recurring thing that I really love to acknowledge the people that I do like to reference in my fiction, and then in the interviews that I give about the fiction that I'm writing, because I feel like it's important to like spotlight other creators and kind of clue your audience into where you like get your inspiration from, and how you source all of this like craziness inside like the maelstrom of your thoughts. Like I feel like it's really important to spotlight others during times like these, you know.
And with so many supportive writers and artists, and with so many people who influence your work and inspire you, how do you decide who to dedicate each book to? And is it more looking at who is a good match for that particular book? Or is it more looking at who is perhaps helping you out or inspiring you, or is just on your mind at the time that you're writing the dedication? So I guess is it more matching them with the book, or is it just matching them with where your mind is at that point in your life?
I guess it depends, but most of the time it's usually like matching them with the book and what I think the book is in conversation with. So for this book in particular, We Are Always Tender with Our Dead, like I said, I dedicated it to Brian Evanson. I don't necessarily think it's on the level of like Brian Evanson quality type writing, because he is just like a master wordsmith and just one of our greatest living storytellers we have. That being said, I was thinking quite a bit about his novel Father of Lies while I was writing the first draft of We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. And for those of you who don't know about Father of Lies, it was, I believe, Brian Evanson's first novel in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's this depraved sort of look at a like minister in the Mormon church, and these like horrible goings on, and it's really all about like human cruelty and depravity. And I really did find myself thinking quite a bit about that book a lot while working on this novel in particular. And I thought, Brian obviously has been such a dear friend, has been such a kind supporter of my work. I feel like maybe these books aren't in conversation directly with one another, but I feel like the overall vibe and the overall like aesthetic and the mood and the reaction that I'm kind of striving for with reaching readers, I feel like it's maybe on par with something like Father of Lies, which is just such a fascinating book and so beautifully done, and but also so depraved. And like I definitely cannot recommend it to everyone just because it's so unsettling and so not for everyone. But I feel like that's what makes his fiction so palpable and so exciting. His fiction is just so raw and like unflinching, especially that book in particular is like very raw. and very upsetting to read. So I really thought that this book in particular was like in conversation with Father of Lies, just like indirectly, not like totally like speaking the same sort of language, but definitely like in the same room, like talking. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I decided to dedicate this book to him. I mean, previous books like The Skin Was Once Mine and Other Disturbances, I had read obviously Paul's collection, The Beast You Are. I had read his other short story collection, Growing Things, and I was really enamored with his short fiction. And I felt like the stories in The Skin Was Once Mine, I feel like they were also like in that weird liminal space of conversation with one another, just like trying to communicate with one another, maybe not like directly but like slightly indirectly. It's like a weird sort of, it's difficult to describe, but I guess it is like kind of based off vibes, but also like trying to see like how I can pair this, like what I'm writing, with who's out there like writing interesting fiction that really speaks to me. Um, so yeah.
See, now what I really want to see is just have this resource where writers say, look, if you like this book by me, here's
Mhm.
another book that I think it's in conversation with, or here's another 3 books that I think it is in conversation with by other authors, because I think that would be just so fascinating. But I mean, of course, if people listen to enough interviews, they can glean that. But
Mhm.
I want, here's the one pager, here's the
Yeah.
easy resource that doesn't include sifting through hours of conversation. But I suppose as well, like, when you admire other writers so much, I can see how there's a reluctance to say, oh, this is like this, because you don't want to kind of appear arrogant and things like that. But
Yeah.
it would be so fascinating, and I think,
I think it's important to spotlight
yeah, yeah.
other authors, like other creators, and if you enjoyed this book that I've written, I feel like you'd enjoy these other books that like really shaped my identity and shaped me as a reader and as a writer. So I think that's really important.
And I think as well, when we respect and we enjoy an author, we want to know, well, what did they like, even if it's actually completely different. So, I mean, the way that I discovered both Carlton Mellick and Sarah Langan, so completely different authors, was because Jack Ketchum recommended them both to me.
Wow.
Because I thought, if anything that Jack Ketchum likes, I want to read.
Yeah.
Um, and what completely different but accomplished and amazing authors Carlton Mellick and Sarah Langan.
Oh, totally. I thought a lot about Jack Ketchum while writing this book too, surprisingly enough. Like you brought him up, but like especially his books like Off Season and The Girl Next Door. I mean, these are all about like human cruelty, really. And especially The Girl Next Door. So I definitely thought a lot about his work and his writing and how he approached certain narratives, and he was definitely one to never shy away from debauchery and like viciousness and all those like unpleasant things that so many people are afraid to actually discuss. Um, so yeah, I thought a lot about him while working on this book too.
Yeah, well, it's very clear, particularly due to a certain section or a certain thread of the story, to see why you would have thought of Jack Ketchum, and especially The Girl Next Door. Now, something that you said earlier was when you pitched it, when you proposed it to Titan, that you came in with this 900 pager, and then it's like, okay, we're going to split it into 3 books. So I want to know, when you and your agent pitched it, did you suggest, look, this can be released as one or it can be released as three? Or did Titan say, hang on a minute, we need to actually, divvy this up into different parts? And then knowing that it would be 3 books instead of 1 book, did that change how you had to approach? Or did you then have to rewrite it so that they made more sense as, I mean, not necessarily even standalones, but just as complete stories? This is the end of a book. This would be a satisfying way to end. Because I think, yeah, if you've got part 2 in a book compared to the book literally ending and another book is coming out, it may affect how that first part ends.
Yeah, no, definitely. The way I outlined the novel, the series rather, I had broken it up into 3 parts immediately, like from the get. So there was like that structure kind of already in place when I sent it to Titan. And it was kind of like a mutual decision, like, okay, we're going to do this as like an official trilogy. It's going to be like 3 separate books. But there was at one point when I was like really kind of lobbying for like one edition where it's like just one book, one like door stopper of a book. But we kind of all like collectively at the end we agreed like, okay, it probably makes much more sense to divvy them up into 3 separate sections. That being said, the editing process for this kind of a book series like this has been really fascinating because it's so much more complex and it's so much more dense than I'm used to with like short fiction. So it's like keeping track of all these separate threads that I'm laying the groundwork for in like book 1 and then carrying that over into book 2. And then I actually just turned in my developmental edits for the second book earlier today. So I'm really happy about that. But there were elements in book 2 that I completely like altered from the initial outline. So that's going to obviously impact book 3 that I now have to kind of like rewrite a little bit and restructure. Not so much so that it like changes the vibe of the whole book, but it's definitely like I made certain choices in the second book that I need to like answer in the third book now. And certain edits were made that if I don't acknowledge them in the third book, readers will obviously be really let down. So it's been like a really colossal undertaking, and I wonder how different it would have been if we just edited the whole series as one thing as opposed to 3 separate things. That being said, it's kind of opened me up to like all of these new possibilities, and I've gone down different paths, especially in the second book, that I wasn't expecting to go down. And it's made for me, it's made it even more interesting and more compelling than when I originally approached Titan about a project like this. Like, I went into places that are so much darker and so much more taboo than the first book, even with the second book. And I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves because I'm sure I'll be back to talk about the second book at some time. But yeah, it's been wonderful actually, like to work on a book, on a series, on this giant mammoth book broken up into 3 separate sections. Like, it's been a joy to work on it so methodically and so like slowly over the course of several years, where I feel like if maybe we had approached it where like we released just one like omnibus edition with all 3 parts included together, I don't know if it wouldn't have turned out the same, you know. It would have been a completely different book. So I'm actually really happy with how the trilogy is like progressing now. Especially now that I've worked on the second book, like, and that's finished. And then, you know, the third book, the first draft of it was finished a while ago, but that being said, I need to go back and like rewrite a lot of elements that I made changes in book 2. But that being said, it's been such a joy and such an honor, and it's been really great to work with 2 editors at Titan as opposed to just my single editor that I usually work on for like all my books there. So I've had the pleasure of working with Kath at Titan for a while. And now I'm working with Kath and George. And George is like the managing editor, and he edits like Stephen Graham Jones. And he's just like one of the coolest and most like thoughtful and most insightful editors I've ever worked with. And he really like, they both do. They both give me like really great feedback and provide like such thoughtful discussion of my work where it's like, what are you trying to say? Like, how can we do this better? Like, how can we improve this? But they also give me like ways to improve it. Whereas they're not just like asking me questions and saying, all right, go figure it out. Like, they're thoughtfully asking and then like positioning certain like options and certain like ways to make it better. So they're giving me like almost like a cheat sheet in a way, like here's what you could do. Like, and they're good to like bounce ideas off of. And I feel like George was such a crucial component of why the first book, I feel like, got such really great trade reviews from like Publishers Weekly and Library Journal and Booklist. Like, it got like 2 starred reviews, I think, like one from Library Journal, one from Booklist. But I feel like it was, and Kath even said this to me the other day. She was like, you know, I feel like this book was like one of your most well-reviewed books that you've published with us. And I feel like that is true. Like, I feel like it has like leveled me up in a lot of ways. Like, I feel like, but I think the slowing down and like distilling it into one book as opposed to one giant epic really helped me navigate the editorial process even better and just like much more like smoothly.
And on the note that you're working with 2 editors as opposed to 1, I'm wondering, what does that logistically look like? You know, are they both looking at it, giving their notes, and then giving it to you? Or do you get a kind of Kath pass and then a George pass? Like, this sounds brilliant and also potentially chaotic, because then what's happening if George and Kath have a slightly different note? Are you getting a document back and there's a few pages of an argument and you're like, what's going on here?
No, it's been so seamless. Like, there's never, they always provide like really cogent, coherent notes together, and they work really well together. There has not been one issue with like George giving a note and then Kath like contradicting it and giving a different note. Like, they read the book, discuss together, compile their notes together, and then send me one document of what they want fixed. And that's kind of how they operate. And it's been like so flawless in how it's been like designed. I feel like this book series in particular, they've really put a lot of like effort and goodwill into it. And I hope more people read it. That's what I really would love. Like, I would love more readers to discover Burnt Sparrow. I think, you know, it's a lot to ask people to read 2 books from the same author in 1 year. So I had A Dark I Become Loathsome come out earlier this year in January, and now Burnt Sparrow book 1 is out. You know, 2 books a year, like, it's possible, but it's difficult to navigate. And sometimes people get confused and they don't know which book is which. Like, they don't know, maybe they're not paying close enough attention. They don't know if like this is the Burnt Sparrow book or if this is the standalone, like, you know. But yeah, I feel like so much love and care and effort has gone into this book series so far. So I would really love to get more people like aware of it, you know.
Yeah, I understand the point about, perhaps the reluctance to read 2 books per year by the same author. But I mean, the good thing is, I mean, that they're almost, whilst there are thematic similarities, they're almost polar opposites in terms of delivery and mode and what they are. I mean, At Dark, I Become Loathsome is almost a short story. I mean, it's a book, but it's very much, it could be a play. It could
Mhm.
be kind of, this is a stage play, whereas, if that's your stage play, then Burnt Sparrow is your opera. It's throwing
Yeah.
everything into it. So,
I want there
I
to be
mean,
a Burnt Sparrow opera one day.
that would be amazing and come with so many explicit content warnings, but I would be so,
I want to watch it at
so
the
up
Met
for that.
one day. I want to see
Yeah.
it performed at the Met.
But I mean, I think too, as well, when I think as authors, we have this concern, are we giving people too much by releasing 2 books a year? But as readers, when we love an author and an artist, it's like, yeah, give me more. Please do that. So,
I feel that way too. I mean, one of my favorite artists, my musical artist, released 2 albums this year. Her name's Ethel Kane. She put out an album in January called Perverts, and then another album later in the year called Willoughby Tucker, I'll Always Love You. And they're like polar opposite vibes. Like one is very like dark, brooding, like drone music. And then Willoughby Tucker is this kind of like still dark, has darker elements, but maybe like a little bit more ethereal and just like uh, just stunning. Both of them are stunning. But I write so much. That's the problem. Like I am always writing. I'm always creating. I'm always at my desktop writing, typing away, creating something. And because that's when I'm happiest. Like I'm happiest when I'm creating and writing new stories. Um, so it's really difficult for me to just like sit on my hands, which my agent does tell me to do quite a bit lately just because I keep getting like pursued by other publishers and we would love to work with you on this and we'd love to have you like work like write a novel for us and like commissions and short story invites and which is great, like I appreciate all of it, but um I just don't want to reach a point where like it's too much, not only for me but for like the readers, because my material is like really dark and upsetting. So uh, I think 2 books is like the most I could probably do in a year.
yeah, I feel like, I mean, this is a dilemma that quite a lot of us have, particularly if we're, I suppose, fast writers, which there's almost a reluctance to say that, because a fast writer, it doesn't mean that you're rushing it. It doesn't mean that it's not considered, but it just, I guess, just the absolute enthusiasm and obsession that we have means that the volume of words and works are going to easily, several times over, exceed this bizarre 1 book per year model that at some point somebody set up and decided. But I do think having that dilemma, and Stephen Graham Jones, I think, has it because he's a very prolific writer. I think Josh Malerman has it, and it does seem to be that the 2 books per year is that kind of sweet spot for the, I guess, most to put out and to still be effective. So, and also, like you say, if you're doing something where each book is operating on a different level, you've got your longer one, you've got your shorter one, you've got your drone album,
Yeah,
whatever it is, just if
yeah.
there's a contrast, then that makes it more acceptable. And for some reason, at least in my mind as well, and I don't know if this is just my bizarre way of thinking, but once the calendar changes to a different year, it's anything goes. So you've got Wretch coming out in March.
Mm-hmm.
This one, Burnt Sparrow, was out in September, but almost to me, it could have been out in December and it would have been fine because now it's a different calendar year. So
Yeah, you got
it's
like a clean
acceptable.
slate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you did last day of December and first day of January, it might be the contradiction. But I think even December, February is completely acceptable. There's some psychological shift and new beginning. And I suppose practically for awards and any other sort of consideration, it kind of resets after a year anyway.
Yeah, it does. I don't know. I feel like 2 a year is manageable for me right now, and um, that's still with me sitting on my hands quite a bit and not putting out more. Because I mean, you have to remember a lot of my works are still somewhat short. Like Burnt Sparrow Book 1 is 75,000 words. At Dark I Become Loathsome was 45,000 words. So At Dark was like a very short novel. Burnt Sparrow Book 1 is a lot longer, but I'm still not writing like 100,000 word novels, you know. I feel like that's yet to come for me. I feel like, you know, maybe further down the line.
And on that note, and we talk about, conflicting books and awards and things like that. So with one being 45,000 words and another being 75,000 words, this means that you're in this situation, and I think it might be the first time in your career where you've got two books that will be eligible for the same award. They'll both be up for consideration in a novel of the year category in pretty much every major horror and fiction award. So I don't know, is that a funny place to be? Is it something you even think about a lot? Is the ideal situation that actually both will be nominated but for different awards? So you've got maybe like a Bram Stoker for Burnt Sparrow, you've got At Dark I Become Loathsome is in the Shirley Jackson Awards. What does one even do, and what do you even do when you have to promote award season?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's something I do think about quite a bit just because it is so like impossible to manage, because it is two novels vying for like the same category. And obviously I feel like this year was just like one of the best years for horror we've ever seen. I feel like 2025 was like on crack when it came to horror. Like we just had like the most like exciting releases published this year. So it's like very stiff competition. Um, that being said, I think what would make sense to me going forward I would love to have like one novella a year and then one full length novel. I feel like that would be like the perfect balance. That being said, everything I have contracted from now until 2028, they're all full length novels. So they're all like they're every single one is at least 65,000 words. So they're like usually in the between like 65 to like 75,000 words. Um, so that being said, like it is difficult to kind of like operate that way and think about like award season. But obviously, at the end of the day, like awards are wonderful and they're great. They're respect from peers and their validation, but they're certainly not why I sit down every day and write at the computer. They're not why I, find myself obsessed with telling these kinds of stories. It's amazing when you are recognized and when you are validated, but um, it's not. It's not like the most important thing ever.
Right, yeah, I think sometimes we can, if we're not careful, concentrate on the wrong things. We can look at so-called metrics, we can look at sales, we can look at reviews, we can aspire to have reviews in certain publications such as the New York Times, but or to get these awards, but for contentment or some type of fulfillment, because I don't want to use the word happiness because it's so fucking fleeting anyway, and perhaps illusory, but I I think that we need to really recapture that childhood joy or that reason that we started telling stories to begin with. Why did we first sit down at the keyboard or at the notepad? Why did we start telling stories? What was it that lit us up? And that's
Yeah.
got to be what keeps us going, really.
That's what keeps me going. I mean, it's that, like, what you said, that childlike joy and fascination with, like, the dark and the macabre and, like, telling these stories, and just, like, my obsession with it. I just am, like, so motivated and so obsessed with writing about unpleasantness in the world and, like, human cruelty. Like, I don't know what I would do with myself if I wasn't able to write about it. And that's why it's so painful to sit on my hands so much and not, release as much as I want to release. But that being said, like, 2 books a year is more than fair. But I'm just, like, so driven and so motivated that I just cannot stop writing.
Thank you so much for listening to Eric LaRocca on This Is Horror. Join us again next time for the second and final part of the conversation. But if you would like to get that and every other episode ahead of the crowd, become our patron at patreon.com/This Is Horror. You can also submit questions for each and every This Is Horror guest. Coming up soon, we will be chatting to Dean Koontz and Ronald Melfi. So if you have a question for either of them, do consider becoming a patron. Okay, before I wrap up, a quick advert break.
From the host of This Is Horror podcast comes a dark thriller of obsession, paranoia, and voyeurism. After relocating to a small coastal town, Brian discovers a hole that gazes into his neighbor's bedroom. Every night she dances and he peeps. Same song, same time, same wild and mesmerizing dance. But soon Brian suspects he's not the only one watching, and she's not the only one being watched. They're watching is The Wicker Man meets Body Double with a splash of Suspiria. They're Watching by Michael David Wilson and Bob Pastorella is available from thisishorror.co.uk, Amazon, and wherever good books are sold.
It was as if the video had unzipped my skin, slunk inside my tapered flesh, and become one with me.
From the creator of This Is Horror comes a new nightmare for the digital age, The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. After a teacher receives a weirdly arousing video, his life descends into paranoia and obsession. More videos follow, each containing information no stranger could possibly know. But who's sending them, and what do they want? The answers may destroy everything and everyone he loves. The Girl in the Video is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. Available now in paperback, ebook, and audio.
Now, before I go, I wanted to remind you that we have been recently pushing out more video content on our social media channels, particularly TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. So if you want to get video clips from the podcast as little pick-me-ups and bits of inspiration, do follow us on social media at This Is Horror Podcast. We've recently put up clips from Joe Hill, David Dastmalchian, Delilah S. Dawson, and Josh Malaman. And there are plenty of other videos that will be coming soon. You can also see clips from our archives from guests such as Dean Koontz, Chuck Palahniuk, and our guest for today's episode, Eric LaRocca. Alright, well that about does it for another episode of This Is Horror. I'll see you in the next one for part 2 with Eric LaRocca. But until then, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.